thing about spirits is the physical. You know what I mean? It's like to connect with the invisible world. It's the visible and tangible world you must go through. I saw something approaching that painting, which is a sort of a almost pyramid of white bodies intertwining with each other and dancing in the tree.
Welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we welcome Dr Mark Fitzpatrick. He is a teacher, writer, and independent scholar, specialising in the weird and wonderful. He has a PhD in literature from the Université de Paris, Sorbonne Nouvelle, and is currently an invited lecturer in several Paris universities. Originally from Cork, he spent 20 years in Paris, living in garrets and trying to get his novels published. When this proved to be of no avail, he began publishing his work online on his website, thehollowbehindthehearthstone.com, under a variety of aliases, and his first novel, Unreal City, is coming out in early 2022. He has recently moved to Aquitaine, where he lives in a little house on the grounds of a strange crumbling manor with his wife, his 2 children, a wicked uncle, and 2.5 cats. In the show, we discuss the nature of belief and get into belief, and Mark details a remarkable experience he had with the other in the land around his home. We also discuss dual observance, being in right relation with place, the festival of Imbolc, and bringing pagan festivals into one circle. In the Plus show, we discuss the relationship between pagan festivals and subsistence farming, and the dependence, the imperative on being in good relation with the land and the intelligences therein. And we also get into how the others may be cultivating human beings to be that connective force between human culture and human society and, well, whatever their business may be. Now, towards the end of the show, we get into the differences between the Gaelic mind and the Anglo mind through their respective languages, their stories, the difference between logos and mythos, and how that influences how the cultures see their world. As always, a big thank you to Ankh patron members: Michelle, Merrily, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Austin, Ali, Carrie S, Brennan, Tyler, Madeline, Jorge, Tony, Savannah, Icaro, William O, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, and Pamela. If you'd like to support the show, you can always sign up to the Patreon. We do the Plus shows, which are the extended versions of these podcasts, and we do some bonus extras as well. Other than that, you can always give us the 5-star review on whatever your podcast client is. This is most pleasing to the algorithmic overlords and helps push the podcast out to a wider audience. Alternatively, you can always buy me a book via my Amazon wishlist. Tommy Kelly's just very kindly explained to me how this works, and I'm going to get that going. Right, let's get on with the show. Mark Fitzpatrick, you're very welcome to the Spirit Box. Lovely to have you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Brilliant. So to get the show on the road, to get things moving, could you give the audience a little bit of an introduction to you and your areas of interest and expertise?
Yeah, of course. My name is Mark Fitzpatrick, and I am from Ireland, but have been living in France for almost half my life now. I've been here for 20 years. And I initially came over to live in garrets and write novels, which I did for a few years. But when it proved not at all lucrative, I went back to university and did a PhD in literature. So I'm still teaching literature, and I'm still teaching other subjects like kind of linguistics, culture, language, literary history, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, all of my underlying all of my classes are vital insights about the enchanted nature of existence and anarchism. And in my spare time, I write and I I make poems and books.
Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have you on the show, and there are definitely areas that are adjacent to the core topics of spirit books. So it's lovely to have you here. Now, we've been following each other on Instagram for a while, and a comment you left on an image of a painting that I shared really, I guess, was the instigator of this conversation we're having now. A couple of months back, just before Christmas, I shared a picture called Fairies and the Peasant Girl, which I will link through in the show notes for those listening, by Yulia Litvinova. I hope I haven't murdered that pronunciation. A Russian artist, and it's a phenomenal painting of a human being encountering some fairy beings, even down to the kind of the twisted nature of the tree. Will remind you, even in isolation, for those of us experienced in this field, you'd look at the tree and go, yeah, that's a portal.
It's one of those.
Exactly. And you left a really interesting comment saying, I saw something very similar last year, or experienced, being the more operative word. And that kind of instigated a conversation, and here we are. So to pick that up, could you take us through that experience and kind of your reflections on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like a lot of people, I have been engaged in a work on the nature of belief and the nature of perception, because I think that a lot of us, when we're children, we are open to perceptions that do not seem to make sense. We're open to perceiving things that do not seem to be logical or rational, that can't be explained. And we're open to belief in things that, again, that cannot be explained. And I think I'm far from being alone in having gone through a long phase where I sort of put away childish things and said, no, I am a rationalist, materialist, atheist. I believe in science. I believe in the evidence of my senses. I believe in things that can be measured. I believe there is no world but the material. But this idea in me was constantly struggling with a very strong sense of the enchantment of place and the enchantment of particular liminal times, which I'd had since I was a kid. And I retained my fascination for sort of fantasy and horror and paranormal literature and media. And I think my adulthood has been a long process of letting go of the certainties, of rational, materialist, atheist belief, which is, what the sort of the mainstream in Western society purports to be. But we, as I'm absolutely certain, if you look at the statistics, the number of people who believe in things like life after death or ghosts or spirits or fairies, etc., it's always much higher, even in Western societies, than you'd think from the common discourse. So I have been gradually working on belief, as in, what does it mean to believe something? What can I believe? What am I able to believe? Trying to expand my capacity for belief. And there's a great bit in Lee Morgan's book. Do you know Lee Morgan? Yeah. So Lee is one of my really like absolute favorite writers on witchcraft. And a fantastic person as well. And in Standing and Not Falling, at the beginning, the first sort of chapter, the first exercise, so to speak, is this exercise that he calls belief. Like not just belief, but really believing, and how to provide evidence for yourself that these things really are. And last year, well, it's actually 2 years ago now, but it's in the long COVID years. It was 2020. And my family and I had the good luck to be sheltering from the plague in an isolated and very beautiful domain in the southwest of France, living on a little house on a big property, which I've known for many years because it's a place that belongs to my wife's family. And I was working on this, like I was consciously working through the lessons of Lee's standing and not falling. And I was working on this thing about belief. And I was also working on the idea of expanding one's sensory perception, to the subtle senses, like to be able to see things out of the corner of your eye or through a hole in a hagstone, or to be able to trust sensations like that particular prickling on the back of your neck, or and I can see you nodding, and I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. And just to be like, well, what if I paid attention to the things my body is telling me? I think it's a particularly embodied type of practice. It's like, let me pay attention to the shivers. Let me pay attention to the getting a kind of a creepy feeling or an eerie feeling. And let me not dismiss that as just a chill or whatever. So I was primed, let's say. And it was also, it was a weird time, I think, for all of us, summer 2020. It was a very weird time in the world. And I was living in this little kind of bubble outside sort of the regular kind of city life that we'd had, and outside the confinement city life, which was so rotten because we'd managed to get away and we were here. And here, when I say here, we're still there now. And so over a course of nights, summer moonlit nights, I was going outside and I was doing exercises that were in an attempt to kind of open myself to presences and kind of to invite them. And it was very much part of an ongoing work of encounter with this land, with this particular place, this particular geography. And there was, and I just remember this sort of one night having this experience that was already bizarre, which was in that kind of hazy summer heat on a moonlit night, the stars can do very weird things. Like the stars can look strange and they twinkle in a way that they don't normally twinkle, and sometimes you get the impression that they're moving, or that you can see the sort of the connecting lines between them of the constellations.
Yeah.
Because living in a city, you're not used to really seeing a sky full of stars.
Yeah.
And when you do and you really look at it, it is cosmically unsettling. And so there was that. And then I was walking, and you're going to enjoy this. It was beside a well that leads into a stream,
right? Which
this place used to be the water source for this place, that goes past a hawthorn, and then between the stream there's a weeping willow tree which has a little tree house in it, and then there's a little pond which is very kind of overgrown, and it has a sallow tree, which is a type of willow. So you've got the kind of the weeping willow on land and the sallow tree in a lake, and then you've got the stream and the hawthorn tree, and then the woods further down. And it's the whole place is this just kind of, it's almost like a crossroads of liminality. Like it's the verge of so many things. And I was walking down there and, sort of basically asking for it. And suddenly I saw on the ground a star. And at first I thought, oh, that's a glowworm. But I've seen glowworms, and the ones we get here are a particularly distinctive kind of greenish color. And it wasn't that. It was a silver pinpoint of light, but on the ground. And I went down to see if I could see what it was. Was it a reflection of the moonlight? Was it something? And I sort of tried to dig around with my hands. There was nothing there, and then it disappeared, and then another one appeared, and another one, and another one. And so I was kneeling in this kind of mossy grass under a hawthorn tree, and there was little stars appearing on the grass. Now, certainly could be some natural phenomenon, but it gave me that feeling of, this is treasure of some kind. This is something to be treasured. There was a feeling of it being a gift, being an experience that was very enchanting. And so that was that. And then the next night, I was sitting, like, looking at that area that I had been, like, in, and I saw, for the first time as an adult, just remarkably, unmistakably, something moving, and it seemed to shift shape slightly as it moved. And I kept checking in with myself and saying, are you seeing this? Is this real? Is this real? Is this real? And I was just and I was just kind of saying to myself, allow this to be if this is it. And it looked like it was in the form of a large white stag. The form was slightly indistinct, and it was a moonlit night, but kind of misty, and all of those things added to there was a sort of a kind of a ghostliness about it. It wasn't very sharply defined, but I could see it moving, and walking across the way behind the willow tree, back out and seeming to look at me. And I just stood there, maybe 30, 40 feet away from it, and it seemed like we were just looking at each other. There was this kind of recognition, and it went away after, like, quite a while. And I'm sure we can talk about this, but obviously a white stag is particularly significant, and it's particularly significant to me personally. And I just felt this great humbling sense of gratitude, and I felt like I had been given that thing to believe that I had needed somehow. And I sort of was kind of formulating a sort of a prayer almost of thanksgiving, and I turned, and to the right of it is the little pond, la mare, they call it in French, and in the middle of it, of this kind of not tiny but not huge pond, there's the sallow tree, and in the middle of the sallow tree, I saw something approaching that painting, which is a sort of a almost pyramid of white bodies intertwining with each other and dancing in the tree. And again, it was one of those things where it was not distinct and it was not clear cut, but I could see it moving. And it looked like a sort of, it was almost like a stately orgy, like a dance of all these bodies intertwining and twisting and wrapping around each other. And I just sat and watched it for a little while, and that was it. And and then I left. I just sort of, said some words of recognition and greeting, and thanks. Although, of course, you're not supposed to thanks, but I get around that by speaking Irish. I said, "Good be upon you," and I went away. And the next day, I went to look at what I'd been looking at, and it's true that in the middle of the tree, there's one large bough of the tree has fallen, and there's, like, you could see where in the moonlight. You could see where in the moonlight there would be reflections on this fallen bough, which would give that kind of shit, So I kind of thought, well, okay, so there's the physical basis, right? There's the material that was used, Um, and yet at the same time, the sense of presence and the sense of this kind of solemn celebration was overwhelming. And after that, I felt like somehow I had just been sort of given access to that kind of belief, the kind that you just don't really question anymore. And the kind where like you've been second guessing yourself for years about this stuff. And now you're just like, oh no, okay. So
I like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've never heard that term before, belief, but it's really resonating, and particularly after hearing you describe your experiences and kind of reflecting on some of my own. That like I've always been interested in these areas, but there were a series of experiences that then moved it away from being kind of, oh, that's an interesting kind of lovely enchanting area, and I kind of long for magic in the world, to
yes,
this stuff is real, it's part of it, and I'm co-creating with everything around me.
yes,
Feeling that. What a tremendous experience,
And it was really, like I said, it was part of an ongoing thing, which has been my relationship with this place, which has been growing and developing over 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And to finally live here has been quite an adventure, like really, really amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine. And there's two pieces that I wanted to kind of ask you about and get your thoughts on. So the first part, you mentioned you kind of built a relationship with this place, and I think that's a vital component in this type of experience, and this type of building a relationship with the intelligences and that are part of the land, that represent the land, that are creating, curating, and tending.
Yes.
That there is that part of building that relationship, as individuals, as human beings, with the intelligences there. I personally believe that is a long process that requires evidence, not so much evidence for us to experience of the other, but the other to experience of us.
Brilliant. So we have to prove that we exist.
Yeah, and we have to prove
to them.
Exactly, and that we are of the mind and heart that we can engage without screwing it up. Without reverting to, particularly we're going to the Western mind, reverting to a materialist point of view or an exploiting point of view of the land. So I kind of
exactly. I think that's really that really resonates with me, and I think I love that idea of that we are the ones who need to provide the evidence. Like the burden of proof is on us. In fact, strikes me when you say that as well. When you talk about the key thing being the land, the local, and it's that it is, and we talk about evidence. It is terribly concrete in a sense. It's terribly the thing about spirits is the physical, in a sense. You know what I mean? It's like to connect with the invisible world. It's the visible and tangible world you must go through. Which is why, I mean, me personally, and obviously I'm not going to knock anyone else's thing, but I have no truck with lists of spirits in books. Like, what is that? Like, what is that even connected to? How are you supposed to build a relationship with a sigil and a list of attributes? I mean, to me, that's a bit like playing Dungeons and Dragons, just to me, I might add. I'm sure, I think a lot of people get a lot out of it, out of grimoire type work. And of course, there's lots of crossovers and there's lots of blurred lines between them, et cetera, caveat. But for me, the encounter with what you're calling the intelligences or these other consciousnesses or with spirits is it is absolutely something that happens in the body. Now obviously there's other ways, like there's the ways of, sort of doing it in dream or trance or vision or journeying or whatever. And that's all very well too. But even those work better when they're associated with a kind of a physical sensing. And, the other thing I've been doing in terms of like philosophically is trying to get my head around what it means to kind of radically embrace an animist perspective. And, Emma Restel Orr has a lovely book called The Wakeful World, which is a great book for someone like me who has tended in their life to be very cerebral, who's an academic, because it basically explains animism, but with a very thorough kind of look at it from a kind of a Western philosophy perspective. And it kind of takes on sort of, the ontology type musings of the Western tradition in philosophy and says, now what if we believe, that everything is spirit and that consciousness is primary, and that we try to move away from the kind of Cartesian dualism of the body and the spirit being two separate things, but rather the body is the physical manifestation of the being, which is the spirit. Or to put it another way, everything is spirit, but occasionally it pokes through into the material. And I don't know, it's kind of a funny image, but the idea that if there is this one kind of great big cosmic consciousness, and it can extrude pseudopods into the material world, which are beings, and then they can touch each other, which is, so therefore our interactions with each other and with spirits and their interactions with each other are the universe experiencing itself, and I thought, bloody hell, it's an awful lot of trouble to go to for a cosmic consciousness just to be able to touch itself. I mean, a bit dirty, really. But yeah, so all that kind of stuff, like trying to come to a defensible position intellectually, because for me it's a problem to just say, well, I feel it's true.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it has to actually like hang together.
Yeah.
And I think that, I had a great conversation with my brother at one point who he has a degree in philosophy. So his mind can go to places that mine is not able to. But he would be like a radically atheist materialist type, really. But we ended up agreeing with each other, which is the idea that, like, well, what is reality anyway?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't exist. And therefore, well, I mean, whatever. We co-create it, as you said. Our perceptions and our consciousness is the only thing through which we know reality. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it is, in a very important way, like equivalent to reality. It is the reality as far as we know. Mm-hmm. And it makes me think, another thing that you hear bandied about a lot in occult circles, dare I say, would be the kind of nothing is true, everything is permitted, which seems to give people an awful lot of leeway. Mm-hmm. And is horribly cynical. But I kind of think of a spin on that and say nothing is real, everything is possible.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Mm. And I find that comforting.
Mm-hmm. It's a deeper message than the previous. It has, I think, far more resonance with one's experience, and particularly in these type of areas where. Yeah,
and I think the previous one, nothing is true, everything is permitted, is kind of a statement about morality in a sense.
Yeah.
And value judgment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. It feels like a bit teenage.
It does, and but I think that what people who are into that sort of thing will often say, people who are into Crowley and Thiliman stuff will say, you need to take it in context. And it's true that if you look at the rest of the quote, it does certainly, it does go beyond teenage sloganeering. Right. But okay. I think it's perfectly suited, obviously, to be put on a T-shirt.
Right.
And if you're a badass 17-year-old Luciferian or whatever, I mean, which is cool, right? Like, don't get me wrong, it's cool to be a badass Satan worshipping 17-year-olds. Like, it's
Definitely.
as cool as many other things to be when you're a teenager. Certainly far from the worst.
Yeah, 100%. There's a hell of a lot worse you can fucking be than 17-year-old Luciferian is a strong look for a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like, I respect the hell out of teenagers. I taught in a high school for the last couple of years, in a lycée in France, and I was really constantly bowled over by how cool like 16, 17, 18-year-olds are. Like, and how much they have to deal with at the moment, and also just how brave they are because they're still making an effort, right. I mean, the ones that I tended to meet, obviously not all of them made much effort because I'm trying to get homework from them, but like I just loved the way that they were. I mean, and it reminded me of being 17. It's like, they were just like full on, like they were really living life to the hilt, and considering it absolutely worth that effort and worth getting your heart broken over and all that good stuff. Anyway, that's a tangent.
No, it's a lovely tangent. There's a lot to be said for a kind reflection on the exuberance and joyfulness and freshness of youth. It's so we can look back, and I'm terribly guilty of this, looking back or looking at young people with cynicism. It's not always a healthy thing to do, and something that, well, it's not a healthy thing to do at all. It's not always a healthy thing. It's not a healthy thing to do. So, well,
I don't know. I mean, like when they're telling you, why they don't have their homework with them for the fourth day in a row, I think a healthy dose of cynicism and skepticism is probably good. But it does annoy me when, and you actually hear this from teachers when they say, "Oh, kids these days, the standards are getting lower and lower." They're not. They're not. It's just that the tests haven't changed, but the kids have. I think anyway.
Okay, yeah.
But I think also another part of being a teenager, if I can kind of try and segue us back into where we were heading, another part of being a teenager is discovering your own skepticism, is discovering your cynicism, your skepticism, and your doubt. It's like I am now going to doubt everything I've been told because I found out that some of it is a pack of lies, and actually I'm starting to suspect it's all a pack of lies. And that's when you reject, religion. Often, I think in the Western world, teenagers often reject religion if they were brought up with one, and then you reject, superstition and the paranormal, and you do that kind of like, I am now going to put away childish things, right? I keep coming back to that, by the way, that passage from St. Paul, because literally, like, yes, you do put away childish things, but as you get older, I think that you start to strive to get them back, and you want to see in a glass darkly, you want to see in that black mirror shapes forming, and that seeing things face to face, the way the teenager is like, I'm going to face the reality of the situation, is actually horribly, what's the word I'm looking for? It diminishes the reality of our experience, is to only look at the empirical reality of it.
And you've just kind of given me a good kind of cue to go back to my second question about your experience. And I've been reading a lot lately about kind of assumptions of old Celtic practice in terms of like the what's it called, the glyph fiosa, like the bright knowledge.
Yes.
And in terms of the idea of like the cauldron of the stomach, the cauldron of the heart, and the cauldron of the mind, have been the areas that we interpret the world, that are kind of our three minds, as it were, mind being a very poor word to describe it.
Yes.
But the idea of the cauldron of the heart, and that's kind of, I wanted to kind of get your reflection on that experience. You know, you're absorbing it through what you're seeing, but you described in a sense that, you know, you felt like you'd been given something, that there was a feeling something was communicating with you. And I kind of wanted to kind of just pull that thread a bit. Like, what did that feel to you? You know, like if we're and I'm particularly asking you as well because of like your academic background and that kind of like I'm sure there's almost like a default setting to intellectualize what's happening.
There is.
How did you feel? What did?
Well, but my question to you is now: do you want me to look back at how I felt and now intellectualize it, or would you like me rather to give you? Because you know that's the Wordsworth thing, right? That's poetry should be emotion recollected in tranquility.
Yeah.
But like at the time, it was simple. It was simple. It was thrilling. You know, I could feel literally thrills running along my skin. You know, I could feel a sort of that kind of surging feeling of excitement in the heart, like sort of, I imagine it sort of as being somewhere around the solar plexus. Yeah. Like that's where, you know, and I think that what you say when you talk about, you know, and when they sort of when the tradition talks about those three minds or those three places of consciousness, you know, there are things that I think we literally have physical sensations.
Yeah, I agree.
For feelings in the head, feelings in the heart, feelings in the gut. And the one I'm talking about, that excitement, right, is something that seems to me to rise from the gut towards the heart. It seems like I can almost, it's like a fist pressing through my solar plexus. And it's, that night, there was this huge sense of wonder, you know, a sense of awe, a sense of the sublime, which is, you know, that which is almost impossible to describe, but only almost.
Right.
The ineffable. And so it's weird, like, you know, it's weird for me to think that I've just taken that experience, which was kind of quite a sacred and holy thing and private, and I've just spoken about it to you, and I've actually spoken about it to very few people. And I've just realized, oh my God, other people are going to hear this. I know that sounds self-evident, but I guess it must be your podcaster juju that you give the impression that this is just a private conversation between, you know, no, but you know what I mean? Like you sort of you create that that idea, and I've just spoken very freely about something that actually I wasn't sure I would ever say out loud in public, certainly not, or even to most people I know. But that's okay, because if you want, or if I want, or if whoever wants, if someone were to say to me, well, you're obviously insane because you're seeing things, I'd say, oh, really? Well, and I could do a whole spiel. And I have it. I'm not going to do it for you because I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure you have your own.
I do have my own, actually.
Yeah, which is the one where we manage to say, okay, yes, but like these things exist in the same sense that other things in the symbolic and in the abstract exist. Like you're not going to sit there and tell me you don't believe justice exists. Well, you know, it's an abstract concept that has a name. It has a symbolic presence. And then I could probably talk to them about the imaginal, you know, about the shared world of the imagination, in which there are shared objects, you know, that we as a culture have created and that we can interact with. And then I could talk to them about Jung, and I could talk about active imagination, you know. So basically I would inundate them with references and facts and sophisticated literary arguments, and they get so bored that they go, okay, I guess you know what you're talking about. Like, you know, I will footnote the hell out of this if anybody messes with me, you know.
Mine's far crasser.
Yeah. Is it just get stuffed?
I'm like, well, come to the graveyard with me tonight. and
Yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah.
try and summon something, and we'll really see. You know, if you've got the stones to come along, we'll see if you really believe what you believe. You know, because what I find invariably when people have a kind of an acerbic reaction to that,
Hmm.
there's a story behind it. You know,
Yes, yes. There's a resistance. There's a
yeah,
resistance, and I think that, like, you're totally right. And you know, most people, it turns out, right? If you speak about it in a kind of a neutral and
mm.
open way, most people are like, "Oh, really? This one thing happened to me one time,"
Yeah,
and they have a story. Of course, they
yeah,
do,
yeah,
because literally, like, the majority of people, even people who are committed atheists,
hmm,
have experienced the unexplained
yeah,
and the mysterious and
hmm,
the stuff that really freaked them out. And they just say, well, I put that down too, and they give it whatever, the
hmm,
excuses, you
hmm.
know? Go on, sorry.
Well, it reminds me of kind of I don't know where I heard this kind of joke, but it almost been in part of the national psyche of Ireland, where even though it's a far more cosmopolitan, far more European country in how it presents itself than it was, say, kind of when we were there, you know, when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I spent a lot of my youth in the west of Ireland, which was very much had a very distinct west of Ireland Connemara culture. If you weren't from Connemara, you know, if you weren't living there 300 years, you were a blow-in, you know, and like has still had
And
that.
were you a blow-in?
Oh,
Was your family
total,
blow-ins?
total.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Jack Ains
Yeah.
from Dublin, you know.
Yeah. Oh no, no, that's
the worst.
it's the worst. Yeah. Well, we were blow-ins in Cork as well, because I
You're,
mean, you know, Cork. Like, people would hear my accent and they'd say, "Where are you from?" And
yeah,
I'd say, Cork, and they go, "Ah, but you're not real Cork, like."
yeah, yeah,
You know, I
yeah,
wasn't Cork enough. I just
yeah,
wasn't Cork enough. You know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I know how you felt to be an
Exactly,
interloper.
exactly, yeah. And that clannish mentality, you know, has all but evaporated. We're told very cosmopolitan, very modern, etc., etc. Yet still, you know, the joke is asking kind of young Irish people who have grown up in the modern world, grew up in the Celtic Tiger and what have you, you know, going, oh, do you guys believe in fairies? They're like, that was just stupid. That's ridiculous. Of course not. We're modern people, but don't mess with the fairies. You know, they will happily have that.
Yeah.
You know, cognitive dissonance is very present in the mind.
The thing that you might be thinking of, because I've actually seen this, it was when they did a vox pop on the streets of Dublin. They were going around asking people, do you believe in fairies? And everyone would go, are you kidding? No, I don't believe in fairies. And then they'd say, would you cut down a fairy tree?
Yeah.
And I was like, you fucking joking me? Of course I wouldn't.
Are you mental?
You know,
yeah.
Like as in, you know, and they did it. And the thing is, it was really consistent, because they asked loads of people, like older, younger, everything.
Yeah.
They asked them, do you believe in fairies? Everybody said no. Everybody said no. And then they said, would you dig up a fairy fort, or would you cut down a fairy tree? And people, like, their reaction was literally shocked. Like, they were like, are you joking? Like, of course I wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
Nobody would do that, you know? So yeah, I think it's the modern version of dual observance, you know? It's the modern version of going to mass on a Sunday morning, but spending your Saturday night in the graveyard or whatever, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I mean, you know, like the Irish sort of early modern culture was absolutely Catholic, but it was also absolutely one that believed in fairies, and that believed in ghosts, and that believed in you know, the whole lot, and not only believed in them, but interacted with them.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just, this is out there. It was like, this is out there, and here's what we're going to do about it. To protect ourselves, usually, you know.
Yeah.
Here's how we make sure that we don't get tangled with that. You know, there's stuff that so just to kind of bounce on that a little bit, and on the being a blow-in Ireland. So my parents were both my dad's from Belfast, and so he's a Belfast Catholic, and his experience of Irishness and Irish tradition is necessarily very coloured by having grown up in Belfast in the 60s and 70s, and it being a kind of a political act to be too into Irish culture. And then my mum is Liverpool Irish. And so for her, Irish culture was something that you yearned for and that you celebrated and that you belonged to. But of course, when those two people moved to Cork just after I was born, they are foreigners, right? And they have not grown up with the Irish traditions. And so neither did I, except I kind of did. And, one of the things that has happened to me over the years, I think, like a lot of people, sort of, weird experiences and weirder experiences led me to start actually studying the supernatural, the occult, and magic, like to actually do something about it. And I think, like a lot of young men particularly, I was very drawn to things like chaos magic and ceremonial magic, Golden Dawn stuff. What I like to call nerd magic. Which is no, and I don't mean that pejoratively. Like, I mean, a lot of the best things in life are nerdy.
Absolutely.
And this is magic for people who play D&D, and this is magic for people who are really into graphic novels, and this is magic for people. And I said young men, and I think that there is a sort of a predominance of the male experience there. And so I was drawn to that stuff, as a lot of young men are. And then after a while, I kind of found myself going, this isn't really for me. But the more, if we can be very stereotypically gendering about it, the more female experience of magic as a debutante, as a teenager, is often more the witchy and Wiccan type thing. And I felt like that wasn't for me either. And so I started trying to find a kind of a middle path. Like, what is the thing? What is the thing? What do I want to be? What kind? And in the end, you have to make your own, obviously. But I found myself increasingly drawn to stuff that was more devotional as well as the operative stuff. And I found myself really, really strongly drawn to the Gaelic Irish deities and sort of those figures from mythology, which I really had grown up with and which I knew like really quite well, and that became a large part of it. And in a sense, I don't really see it as a religion. It's a spirituality, perhaps, but I feel like the Irish, gods and goddesses are not the same as, like, say, the Greco-Roman sort of pantheons and so on like that. They're much more, how shall I put this? It reminds me of the Terry Pratchett line, "She didn't believe in gods." That would be like believing in the postman. They're just around, and they're present. There's a sort of a closeness. They're not Olympian, right? They're not up there raining down thunderbolts or raining in their magnificence. They're things that you can encounter faces of in your daily life, and they're kind of relatable because they're complicated and fickle, and they're but again, I hesitate to sort of talk about that too much to other people because lords know the sort of Celtic pantheon, which there is no such thing, of course, but the Celtic pantheon has been much abused by neo-paganism, and I feel like I'm about to go on a rant, but
you can rant away.
I am maybe already midway through one and just didn't realize. But some people who know the mythology and who know the folklore really well get very irate at its abuse by sort of fluffy neo-pagan appropriation that sort of conflates this and that, gets it all wrong, and gets and I just sometimes want to say to those people, who I respect because they often come from a position of being scholars of the stuff, I really respect that, but I'm like, if you're going to get angry because people are interpreting your culture wrong and you're Irish, don't worry about it. You know, it's one of our biggest exports. Is a sort of a debased, bastardized version of our own culture, and we have used that to make much more of a mark on the world than we otherwise would have. We are the ones who sell our own culture, but it doesn't make our culture go away. You know, they can't ruin it for us. If you want to be worried about appropriation and oppression, go and look at people who are not white English speakers who live in Europe. They have a lot more trouble with it than we currently do. And I believe as Irish people, our experience, like our history with colonialism and imperialism and oppression and being a minority language and being a minority ethnicity, actually, it should never be the grounds today for us to try to play the victim, but it should absolutely be the grounds today for us to look out for and help those who are victims.
Right.
Because our experience speaks to their experience. And we just kind of hit the jackpot because we ended up being able to pass for, the dominant class.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. I wanted to ask you about Saint Bridget, or
yes,
more widely, Bridget, and in all the various different incarnations, versions of that. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that deity as broadly as possible.
Yeah. Well, really is one of my favorite figures from the Irish tradition. And I think I was torn between saying from Irish mythology, from the Irish, from the Irish gods, whatever. But no, tradition is good. She's a figure from Irish tradition. And I was stunned, actually, I think it was last year or the year before, probably the year before, to see our wonderful president, Michael D. Higgins, giving an address on the 1st of February on Imbolc, and absolutely doing dual observance, recognizing the goddess breed as well as Saint Bridget, and explicitly saying these two things are both a part of our tradition. And I thought, wow,
phenomenal!
How many heads of state recognize a country's pagan past? And I think he lit the fires at Uisneach on Bealtaine a couple of years ago as well.
Wow.
He actually bore the torch to the beacon, to the bonfire.
That's remarkable. I had no idea.
Yeah. Which, I mean, just for people who maybe don't know much about him or that, he is our head of state, but he doesn't have much power. He's a bit like the Queen, but we elect him. And he's a small, elfin, beautiful man who is a poet, a philosopher, a feminist, a socialist, and all of those great things. And I just love that he's very soft-spoken, and he speaks beautifully, and he is refined and elegant, and also has an impish sense of humor. And the fact that we've elected this guy like twice to be our president, I think is a wonderful thing about our perception of Irishness. But also, he is highly alive to the sort of the revival of interest in Irish spirit traditions. And when he gives like a public address, a national televised address, which he starts in Irish, as he always does, and talks about Imbolc, and gives a little précis of what it is. And when he lights the fires at Uisneach, which is the place traditionally where the fires of Bealtaine, Beltane, as modern pagans often call it, Bealtaine being May Eve, the eve of the 1st of May. So those are two of the big festivals, the fire festivals of the Celtic calendar, or the Gaelic calendar, rather, I should say. I think a lot of people first come to a sort of a Celtic spirituality through Breed, or Breed is one of the first people that they encounter, and is one of the most approachable and one of the most lovely sort of deity figures around, because her associations are just amazing, because she's both a goddess of the home and hearth, but also a goddess of poetry and inspiration, and a goddess of the forge, and she's a goddess of herding as well. So she has this kind of threefold aspect to her, and as do so many things, right, in the kind of the Celtic mindset. And she has been, I think, a sort of a presence in my mind's landscape since I can remember, actually. Like, I remember, I don't know if this was like this for you, but as a little kid, I remember being told by certain adults, including teachers, that the 1st of February was the first day of spring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people laugh. People they're like, how could February be spring? And you say to them, well, it's not like literally spring, but it's when the first stirring of spring happens.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, as a gardener, you know, you're not putting any seeds out on the 2nd of Feb, but that's for sure. You know, But it is that I guess that handing of the torch, the rekindling of the torch from the Cailleach to Breed at that time.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
I'm still struck by Michael D lighting the fire at the Hill of Uisneach. That's incredible. Yeah. You know, and for
Isn't it?
It really is.
Like, what a symbol.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that also, and it actually ties in with what you're just saying, which is the handing on of the torch, you know, like passing on the torch of tradition to the next generation, bearing light when all is in darkness. I mean, all those are such powerful images. And like, I think that he does those things in full consciousness of the poetry of that gesture.
Yeah.
On all levels, you know. And for me, the Imbolc and the idea of like rekindling the fire, it's obviously not something that was just specific to Irish culture either, because it's Candlemas, and it's the festival of like the return of light, or the rekindling of the fires all over the place in the Northern Hemisphere. And it was actually my first pagan revel, shall we say, a few years ago, when I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to start celebrating these things, and I'm going to invite people to my house, and we're going to do it. And so I sent a bunch of friends an invite and said, look, we're going to celebrate Imbolc, and this is what it is, if you don't know, and I want you all to come over, and we're going to have a revel, you know, a pagan revel. It'll be brilliant, and we're going to drink beer or wine or whatever, but we're going to drink, and we're going to pour a libation, and we're going to light some candles, and we're going to, you know, just bring something that has sheep's cheese or sheep's milk in it, you know. That would be an appropriate dish, you know. It includes some kind of sheep's milk or sheep's cheese, and people were delighted. They really got into it. They were like, this is so much fun. And I left it just tongue in cheek enough for plausible deniability. Like, if anyone felt uncomfortable, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't that I was afraid of being embarrassed myself. Yeah. But I didn't want anyone else to feel embarrassed. And so we just had a really lovely party, you know. And
I'm planning on doing something this year, something similar. At the summer solstice. And probably belting it as well.
Me too, actually.
What was I going to say before I forget? Because I'm just conscious now of a lot of listeners, a lot of kind of say essentially our non-Irish listeners wouldn't be aware of what Uisneach is, and the significance of the president lighting the fires. And I'm trying to think of, you might come up with a better metaphor than me, but if you can imagine the Queen leading being a guest of honor at the Stonehenge summer solstice, rising of the sun.
Perfect.
Something like that.
Perfect. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be like, like the head of state, participating in the most emblematic pagan ancient tradition. And I think, you probably know better than I do, because you're but like the lighting the fire on the hill at Ushnik is it's only been revived like relatively recently, right?
Yeah.
Like it hasn't been going for ages and ages.
No, not at all.
And most of these things would have been they would have persisted, like, actually, I mean, well up into the 20th century, like the cross quarter days, they call them in neo-paganism, but they're the ones that are in between the equinoxes and solstices and the following equinox, etc. And we have one in spring, which is Imbolc, and one at the beginning of summer, which is May Eve, so that's Bealtaine, and in August, which is Lunasa, and then Samhain, of course, is the one that everybody knows. And that's the equivalent of, or that's what became Halloween, let's say.
Yeah.
But I think that everybody knows Samhain, who's anyway interested in that kind of thing at all. But Imbolc is Imbolc is a very sweet one, and I know that there's a debate about the name. Nobody's quite sure what the derivation is, but it seems like it comes from Imbolc, which means in the belly or in the bag. And Imbolc was because, so this might be a poetic interpretation, but it's one that I think has a truth to it. It's because the sheep, the ewes, began lactating at that time because they were pregnant with the spring lambs, right. And that's why it was a festival, because the first of the fresh sheep's cheeses could be made after the winter, and that was the sign that spring was on its way, because the lactating of the ewes.
Fantastic.
And so I like that idea that's what it means. So Imbolc means Imbolg, and Bolg is the word for in the belly, right? Yeah. And I also I think that it's a wonderful time to shake off the cobwebs and sort of try and light that spark again in ourselves, after the winter. It's sometimes it's easy to feel a bit hopeless at the beginning of February. It's been long and it's been dark and it's been crappy, and I think that, this year, God knows, it feels like it's been long and dark and crappy for such a long time, but I think that sort of idea that, like, this will pass and the sun is going to come back, and now's the time we light the candle in the dark to remind ourselves of that. And I think it's something that I have actually used as a meditation to deal with depression as well. It's something that I have used to express the feeling of trying to carry within us that fire of hope and courage, fire in the belly. Like that's one that you feel with the belly mind. And a flame in the heart is hope, perhaps. And then the fire in the head, of course, is another thing. But that's also that's inspiration, right?
Yeah.
So I think that Breed is a wonderful. I want to kind of say that she's like a sort of a light bearer and a kind of an opener of the way, Okay. She's like an éclaireur, which is what they call a scout in French, which is the one who goes forward with the light. This is a really rich conversation. I really appreciate getting into this with you. But that said, in order for me to remain in right relation with my immediate environment, I think I'm going to have to go and...
We are going to... I think it's time to wrap up. For those who want to follow more or learn more about you or find out more about you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Okay, so there's I have a website which has a blog which is called thehollowbehindthehearthstone.com. Just all one word, the hollow behind the hearthstone. And there's on Facebook and Instagram, I go by the Hedge School, which is kind of the overarching project. So on Instagram, it's the Hedge School, separated by 2 underscores. So the underscore hedge underscore school. And voila. You can find, I tend to, most of what I do is going to be on there.
Grand. I'll pop all that in the show notes. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And
really.
Do it again
I loved it, and I hope so.
Yeah.
And one of these days, I hope that we get to actually meet on the land.
Yes.
Yours or mine, whichever you like, and get in right relation with some of its local fruit of the vine and work.
That'd be wonderful.
And so on like that. Yeah. Well, it would be my pleasure. I hope so.
Likewise. Have a lovely evening. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Wonderful stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. I certainly did. It was a great conversation. I think Mark and I could have gone for another bit there, no doubt. But our paternal duties called. Now, if you enjoyed that, do check out Mark's Instagram link and website link in the show notes. Right, that's it from me. Take care and good luck. I'm Dara Mason. You've been listening to The Spirit Box.